Welcome, Dr. Sarah, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with an easy question. Your academic journey, especially your experience in Oxford, if you can tell us about it and any tips to get into such college.
أولاً أنا أعرف اتفقنا إن we do the interview in English، لكن مساكم الله بالخير جميعاً في البداية، وألف ألف مبروك لك بلقيس إطلاق المنصة. ويعني ما تتخيلين قديش أنا فخورة فيكي وفخورة في المبادرة الرائعة هذه، ويشرفني أن أكون من أول الضيوف لك على المنصة، فشكراً على الاستضافة الكريمة وسعيدة بتواجدي معكم.
والله الشرف لنا إنه أول guest تكون أنت صراحة.
الله يخليك. So to answer your question, let me start by maybe just giving a brief overview of where I started and how I got to where I got to today. I grew up in Washington, D.C. for the first part of my life as a kid, which is why I'm much more comfortable and fluent perhaps in English as a first language. And over there, I spent the most formative years of my childhood. I moved back to the kingdom, and my mother realized that, first of all, our Arabic was very weak and that she wanted us to integrate very properly within society amongst our friends and cousins and people that we knew in Riyadh. And so she put us into all Arabic schools. I graduated.
Such a challenge.
Yes, it was a challenge. And I'm not sure it helped that much with my Arabic, but it worked in the sense that we were properly integrated and socialized. And I think more than anything else, it was those years were the most character building and personality forming years of my life, because I think I was properly socialized and integrated into a social fabric that we felt very much a part of. Yeah. And so I went to high school في مدارس المملكة, kingdom schools, where like I said, for the most part, our education was primarily in Arabic. But so my older brother went to school in Boston, and we all knew as siblings that we would end up studying abroad. And so obviously that meant, preparing for your SATs and things like that. I remember even taking my SAT prep exams. So we didn't have prep classes or things like that in school. So we did our own studying at home, and they give you like scrap sheets of paper for your SATs where you can write notes or solve math equations and things. And all of my scrap paper was in Arabic, because even though like processing and from a language perspective, I was more comfortable with English, we were learning statistics and science and chemistry and biology in Arabic. So all of that was being done in Arabic on scrap paper. And then that's the way that I sort of went through my SATs. And then started undergrad at Wellesley College, which was not so different from my schooling experience in Saudi, because it was one of the few all-women's schools in the United States.
Okay.
There's 7 schools on the East Coast called the Seven Sisters, and Wellesley is one of them that remain sort of all women's. And it's a liberal arts school. It's small classrooms, intimate contact with professors. It encourages discussion and dialogue and critical thinking. And actually, it was at Wellesley where I discovered an entirely new discipline to me, which I hadn't heard of as a child growing up, which was anthropology. Because at the time in Saudi, I think there was less of an emphasis on the social sciences and the humanities. Which is why I think part of the reason why I was motivated to study primarily a STEM degree. So I did biology as a primary major and primary discipline. And Wellesley makes you take all sorts of electives to sort of tick off your general knowledge and expanding your horizon. And
how was the shift? Sorry for interrupting. From Wellesley, when you finished it, did you directly decided to go into Oxford, or like what happened in your academic journey in between these two?
So in Wellesley, I studied biology and anthropology, and I had a really great thesis advisor, and he was the professor who oversaw all of my independent research that I did. And so through him, I fell in love with genetics. He was such a fantastic teacher. His name is Drew Webb. I remember I took my first genetics class with him my second year at Wellesley, and I was just completely I've never seen anyone, even to this day, explain something so complex, so articulately, and so in a way that is so accessible. I fell in love with genetics and biology through him, and continued to do research with him and wrote a senior thesis with him. And then I was faced with this critical juncture of, you know, what next, what after Wellesley? And I knew I didn't want to go into medical school, and I wasn't ready to come back home yet. I knew there was more left. And so I decided that I would work in the Boston community for a year, and explore what it meant to work as a geneticist, to think like a geneticist, to research like a geneticist, and see if that was something that was interesting to me and that I could commit to, whether for a PhD or even for a longer period of time. So I worked. Luckily, I got a research assistant position with who was at the time the president of the American Society of Human Genetics. And it was totally by coincidence. And I knew everything that I now know about the society through her and her lab. And so Professor Cynthia Morton, she exposed me to, I mean, they call Boston the Mecca of biotech, right? So she exposed me to everyone who was anyone in the biotech industry in Boston. And by exposing myself to these talks and collaborations and seminars and so on, I knew that this was the subject that piqued my curiosity the most. And even if it's not something that I'm committed to or won't be committed to for life, it's something that I'll enjoy studying, right? It's something that's going to keep me intellectually stimulated. It's going to challenge me. It's going to push me outside of my comfort zone, which is what it did constantly, even at Wellesley, trying to perform, and then also trying to prove myself in her lab. And then ultimately, I also knew that I didn't want to spend forever abroad. So I wanted a PhD program that was reasonable in terms of length.
So you got interested in biotechnology.
Yeah.
So you chose the subject matter or the subject you want to study. But how did you choose Oxford, or why did you choose Oxford?
So this is, so again, a few practical reasons and some not so practical. One was that the PhDs in the UK are shorter than the PhDs in the US. So I knew, okay, the UK. And then I said, okay, I went to Wellesley, you know, I worked with this, you know, superstar professor at Harvard. I want to maintain and I want to continue to rise up in terms of the caliber of institutions I joined. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of great schools in London, but why not aim for Oxford and Cambridge, okay? And then sifting through faculty pages, it seemed like that was a lot. It was overkill. There's so many people doing interesting stuff in Oxford and so many doing interesting stuff in Cambridge. And so to sort of expedite the application process for myself and not have to go through all of that, I just decided, okay, let me focus on one of these two schools and try it out. And if I get in, great. If I don't, then I'll reapply to a number of schools the following year.
Alhamdulillah, you got in.
I did, yes, alhamdulillah. But those are sort of the practical reasons. The reasons that are, the other reasons were that the faculty pages that I was attracted to in Oxford were faculty that were working in the very cutting edge of what we knew were genomic technologies at the time. And I wanted to throw myself sort of in the deep end and challenge myself and train in areas where, you know, only the best and brightest in the field would sort of venture and have the resources and intellectual capacity to engage in researching those sorts of technologies. And so I knew that would be available in Oxford. And I also wanted to learn how to code, right? So a big part of genetics now in biology is a field called bioinformatics, which relies on computer programming. So bioinformaticians use languages like R and Java and a bunch of other things. And it's not something that I was exposed to because as I was studying, the field was still very much what we call wet lab biology. So like benchtop work and things like that. So these researchers that I wanted to work with in Oxford were combining both of those things. So they were doing statistical genomics and computer programming and coding with all of the stuff that I knew I could bring to the table in terms of wet lab techniques. So if you consider all of those factors, sort of that's the reason I decided to apply to Oxford. But then that's what I ended up doing, is just apply to Oxford, which is pretty unusual for an application process. But I think that in general, in my life, I consider myself quite a decisive person. because I found that through being decisive, you sort of, the aim really with every action, every decision is to separate the signal from the noise. And I think sometimes you might pick up on the wrong signal if you are, very quick in decision making and a decisive person, but at least you stay out of the noise as much as possible. And so that's what I've always tried to do with my decision making.
Just one more follow-up question on your experience in Oxford, because we're going to live stream this later on. I'm sure some of the girls that are going to watch this might ask question, any tips to get into Oxford?
So that's a question that I understandably, and I think all of our Saudi peers and friends who have gone to top schools get all the time. And I think we as a young Saudi generation have made significant strides in terms of penetrating these top schools around the world, right? So I think hopefully in maybe 5-10 years from now, this question won't be as common. At least that's my hope, as it is today, just by virtue of the sheer number of really young, talented Saudis getting into these schools. However, I will say that in retrospect, honestly, there is no like secret recipe. There's no stepwise process, right? And for a PhD, it's a little bit different than an undergraduate program where I can tell you, nail your essay, get a good SAT score, get good recommendations. For PhD programs, it's a little bit different. I think what maybe stood me out amongst my peers with these particular supervisors that I wanted to do my PhD with is that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I think they were kind of, I don't know, maybe impressed in a way, but also a little bit taken aback. Like, how could someone so young know exactly what they want to do? It could be interpreted in a good way, but I just think that they wanted to rise up to the challenge and show me that perhaps through this journey, you will end up taking detours and changing your mind and making mistakes, which is exactly what happened. But I think for someone to come and say, again, having no experience in the field, which is a little bit naive, right? To say, I want to research this technology and I want this experiment to be part of my PhD and I want to learn this coding language. It was a little bit, different.
The answer is knowing what you want.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. But moving to your career, Dr.سارة, you had somewhat a non-linear career path. You first worked in medical research in Harvard, MIT, mashallah, and Oxford, and then a very different move. You moved to NGOs, you worked in MIST, and then again, a different move. You moved to the ministry, to the world of investment, as you took a role in the Ministry of Investment. So how, what, and why? Like, how all this shaped Sarah, and why did you choose this non-linear career path?
So I think nonlinear career paths are very interesting and something that we're seeing a lot more of in innovative parts of the world, like in Austin, Miami, Silicon Valley, New York, and the movement is spreading to Europe, and I think it will spread through the Middle East and Asia.
Hopefully very soon.
Yeah. And it's the idea that this like industrial revolution mindset of like, pigeonhole yourself into a particular career path and stick with it for the rest of your life. And we see this now, by the way, even post-COVID, like even with office jobs and 9 to 5, like these antiquated ideas of what it means to work, I think are becoming more and more obsolete, because work is a part of your life and it can't be this automated, kind of, again, a factory-based model where you go, you clock in, clock out, and there's no meaning, there's no adventure, there's no purpose. And I just felt like I couldn't commit myself to a career that didn't have those things, right? Career, meaning, purpose, fulfillment. And so the thing that I knew very early on is that I wouldn't be happy staying in academia. Okay, so I went into the PhD knowing I wasn't going to be an academic. I knew I wanted to move back to the kingdom. Okay, so what are the career options moving back to the kingdom? There's not much in biotechnology and in genetics from a private sector perspective or from a startup entrepreneurial perspective. The ecosystem there is still very young, okay? Sure. And one of the things that we're trying to do through my work at the Ministry of Investment is try and help build that ecosystem. So I don't want to stay in academia. I want to move back to the kingdom. What are my options, right? So it's always kind of, there are always filters going through my mind when it comes to this decision-making process. And so I said, by virtue of what I've studied, I have a skill set, okay? And I define myself by my skill set and not by my discipline or by my major.
That's
so
very interesting.
Studying genetics meant that I had, hopefully a good quantitative background, a good, computational skill set. I think clearly, I think through the scientific method. These are all skills that you can take with you to virtually anywhere. And what inspired me to think about careers in a nonlinear way was I was really surprised when I saw firms like McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and others come to Oxford, Cambridge campuses and try and recruit PhDs in STEM or even MDs or JDs, right? So I was like, why would these people take on career paths in investment banking or in consulting? But then it made a lot of sense to me because these firms are generalist firms, right? They just want people that with a transferable skill set that they can deploy from project to project and utilize in that way. And so I started to think of myself like that, okay? So I could go to wherever my passion takes me, and I could work on interesting stuff that make me feel closer to impact, but use my skill set along the way. And this idea, when I moved back, everyone assessing my CV was like, روحي المستشفى الملك فيصل تخصصي ولا روحي الحرس, go work in research institutes or go work in labs or in academia or one of our universities. You've done all this in genetics, like why waste your degrees? And to me, that was, it just signaled that maybe the workforce needs to respond to some of these global trends and that it wasn't quite ready. MISC was different because MISC was ready. So MISC is very young, it's entrepreneurial, it's an NGO, it's all about innovation and exploring yourself and empowering youth. MISC had also been exposed to a lot of the work that I was doing abroad. طبعا أنا when I was in Oxford, Vision 2030 was announced, and all the changes that we're experiencing today were just at the start. And foundations like MISC and other places were, again, reinventing themselves to respond to the vision. And when I wasn't doing my PhD research, I was busy advocating for the kingdom because I was so excited about these changes happening back home. And I felt like there were not enough grassroots voices in the places that I was close to, like London, and would travel to the States for work and DC and so on, where we could share as women, our Saudi women, our voices about the changes happening for Saudi women, but also across the society and across the country. And so that was the link between myself and MISC, is that, okay, you're interested in advocating these things, you're interested in policy research, you have a background in anthropology, you also have these skill sets that are valuable. And so how could we build a mutually beneficial and valuable relationship? So that's where I started building research capacity there that almost mimics the research capacity I've seen in think tanks around the world for how do we build data-driven policy solutions for youth.
Yes.
And we discussed things like youth identity in response to the changes happening, where we had various roundtable discussions. We've done youth mental health. We've done many other projects.
If we want to tackle down the main answer of this and know how did you have this non-linear career path, it should be that for someone who want to explore such opportunities like you, and to focus on their skill sets rather than what degree they hold.
Absolutely. It's skill sets, it's transferable skills, but also it's working with people and in places that you are energized by and fulfill your passion. Yeah. Yes. And that doesn't have to match your discipline all the time.
Yeah. You mentioned a very interesting point about the change that happening in Saudi, and you mentioned how as Saudi women we're advocating our voices, and that brings me to another question about the changes in Saudi for women. Like, I'm a journalist, and just a few years ago, whenever I'm covering a conference here, I would be the only female in the conference. But now, alhamdulillah, we're not that many, but let's say we're 4 or 5. So there's a lot of changes that happening for women in Saudi. How do you observe all of this, and what do you think is still needed?
So I remember when I got a call from a journalist when I was in my apartment in Oxford to comment on the lift of the ban on driving. Okay, and I remember I had no media experience, right? And we know better now than when, certain media outlets call you, you double check, you understand, you do your due diligence. I was speaking to everyone, okay? And I was like, this is, has been a long time coming. This is welcome change. This is incredible. And I still, that energy and that momentum that I felt when the ban was announced, it must have been like what, five years ago or now. And I still take that energy with me today, and I feel it today with everything that's changing, the pieces of legislation that have been reformed that empower women, women's participation in the workforce, where we've already 5 years into announcing Vision 2030, we've already surpassed our Vision 2030 KPIs for the percentage of women integration into the workforce.
Just to highlight what she's mentioning, the target was to reach 30% of women participation, and we reached 34.6%.
Yeah, and we have, 8 years to go. So that's really incredible. And everything else, and you can see it from a social fabric perspective, the way that society is responding to this. I remember when I was abroad, in think tanks and in the media world in the UK or in the US, we used to get questions like, oh, are the Saudi people ready for this opening that's about to happen? And what will there be any conservative backlash, or what will the reaction be? And I've never seen in my life a more seamless transition, a seamless transition that is so profound, so socially, anthropologically, sociologically profound. And yet the pace with which it has happened and the responsiveness to the change, I think only signals that people have been ready, right? In the same way that I said to the journalists, it's been a long time coming, and finally women can drive. So I think people have been ready, and I think we're barely scratching the surface. The same thing I said about talent and human capital. I think in 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about the Saudi talent pool, and the Saudi private sector, the Saudi innovation sector, the extent to which Saudis come back and actually transfer their skills to building the ecosystems here. I think, again, like I said, we're barely scratching the surface.
Okay, very interesting. But like talking about women, you had an amazing role model growing up. Your mother, د.خولة, she's an award-winning scientist and inspiration in STEM. So, and in your household in general, it valued knowledge and science. How all this upbringing shaped Dr.سارة?
Oh, we could talk about this for days, right? Because it's totally profound. So we're all very close as a family, my siblings, my parents. My mom has been a role model from day one, of course. By the way, she's the one who discouraged me from entering medical school because of how difficult it was for her going to medical school at the time in the 80s, early 90s in Saudi. And of course her circumstances were unique, and she shared her story, and she had all 4 of us, me and my siblings, when she was in medical school, and so on and so forth. But she's the one who encouraged me again to take this open-minded generalist approach to like who you are and what you do in life. And so she said, go study biology. If you like it, great. Figure out what you want to do after. If you don't like it, take courses and other things and see what you want to do. And so she always instilled in us this idea
of exploring.
Of just be an adventurer and be a wanderer and explore and try something. And that informed also my career path of just like, try this NGO gig for a while. If it doesn't work out, try this. If it doesn't work out, jump to the next thing. And so I think me and all my siblings would characterize ourselves. One of our favorite books is a book that I've recommended to some people in this room called Range by David Epstein. And he talks about how, generalists versus specialists, and how generalists in our future economies will be the ones who thrive. And he describes generalists as people who are T-shaped. So you have a deep concentration, or a vertical where you have deep expertise. And then you have the horizontal cap of the T that is everything that you are a generalist in or that you're interested in. And that T model is you and is who you are. So sometimes if you explore things that are too high up in the surface, you feel like you're doing something superficial. And if you do something too deeply specialized, you feel alone. And so find something that gives you that balance. So I think in some ways throughout my upbringing, that's kind of what my mom instilled in us. And we've always just been very competitive as siblings. And so we mentor each other, but we also try and one up each other. And we do this with conversations around the dinner table, but also with our academic achievements, but it's a healthy and it's a fun camaraderie that we enjoy at home. But she just going back to the woman point, I think what she has done, you know, and I won't praise her too much because I'm obviously very biased, but watching her career path, my mom had us all at a very young age, so we witnessed her career. We remember it very well, at least me and my older brother, and watching her go through what she's gone through in terms of work-life balance, and at the same time penetrating a career in a domain that across the world is very male dominated, but also coming back to the kingdom and asserting herself as a leader in this space, in a place where the workforce was very male dominated regardless of discipline. And so seeing her go through that and seeing her assert herself, but then come back home and be a mother, right? And just let down her guards and be so loving and affectionate and caring. I think that's informed, especially for me and my sister, the way that we view work-life balance. And when people debate work-life balance and say, oh, you know, it's a myth, it doesn't exist, it's not important.
Oh, it does exist.
Of course. And I've seen it exist. So I've seen someone achieve work-life balance, right?
From this successful experience of your mother, what tips do you give to achieve such a work-life balance?
So listen, I can't tell you the emotional and psychological cost that achieving that balance has the toll that it's taken, right? Behind the scenes,
of course,
right? We don't know. But now, as a young adult, and of course being part of the workforce, and I understand and I can empathize with again the emotional and psychological aspects that must have played in her life with four children to take care of. So I'm sure it isn't easy, but what I learned from her is that you need to disconnect and you need to be very assertive about drawing boundaries, right? And not all career paths and not all professions, not all job environments allow you or give you the luxury of asserting those boundaries, right? And so, you know, you have to make the call that, you know, if a place doesn't respect my boundaries or if a boss doesn't respect my boundaries, then what does that mean for you? And then you go through that cost benefit analysis and you decide whether you need to move on. But for me, at least what my mother taught us is that it's non-negotiable, right? So having time to yourself, to unwind, to spend time with loved ones. So I don't have children, but I spend time with my friends, my siblings, my dog. These are all important things that we need in our day-to-day lives. I try not to be the person who cancels on dinner plans and I try to make it to weddings and family occasions. And so I've seen her not allow the burdens or the obligations of work interfere with life, and that these things feed into each other, which feeds into the original idea that work shouldn't be a burden, that it should be fun and it should be fulfilling, and it should be something that you value in a way that is complementary to the things outside of your work and to your life, and that both of those things are important.
I'm just going to wrap up with one last question, then we're opening the floor for Q&A. So د.سارة, mashallah, you're such a successful, inspiring young lady. So what characters in you or traits that you think helped shape you, or you would advise people to focus on?
Thank you for that. That's very, very generous of you to say. I think it's sometimes I don't want to go through a list of characteristics. What I'll tell you is,
we can just
What I'll say is I'll name one and I'll talk about it a little bit. I think the most important personality trait, if I could give any advice to anyone to sort of develop and invest in, it would be self-awareness. Because I think if you know yourself, so self-awareness, you know, sometimes we undermine what it means and people use it a lot. And but what I mean about it is something much more profound than what you might pick up at the surface. So self-awareness means really understanding who you are, right? Like, what's your moral compass? What's your value system? What do you care about? What is non-negotiable? What do you not compromise? What do you enjoy? Even basic interests, like what music you enjoy listening to, what food you enjoy eating, what people you enjoy spending time with. Understanding these things and being introspective about them, like being deliberately introspective about who you are as a human being and how you show up in this world. That's not something we think we know it, right? Because we go about our lives as us, like we have our identity, we have our, but taking the time to really challenge yourself and have that internal confrontation with yourself about what does it mean to be who I am? Like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Why do I enjoy the things that I enjoy? Why do I hate the things that I hate? Right? And that, I think, as a base and as a foundation, is the most important thing, the most important investment with a long-term return horizon that you could make for yourself, because it does exactly the thing that I said in the very beginning, which is it helps you separate the signal from the noise. So if you know who you are and how you show up in the world and what you stand for, making decisions along the way becomes relatively easier. And you live a life that is just much more honest, right? Yeah. Because you know what interests you and what doesn't, and you pursue the things that matter to you. But this, I'll just end with this, is that this requires spending a lot of time alone. And I had that experience during my PhD, because throughout my time in Boston, I always lived with family. There was always a sibling there, 2 years younger, 2 years older. When I moved to Oxford, although I spent a lot of time amongst my peers and doing work, I did have a lot of time in my own space, and so that gave me time to listen, to read things that interested me, that helped me grow as a person, to absorb different mental models and opinions and ideas, and just debate with myself, like, why do I believe in this? Why do I care about this? Break things down into first principles and then build things back up again, so that my convictions sit on really solid foundations.
So the tip to wrap up this point would be like to explore oneself and to stay true
to know yourself. To get to know yourself. Absolutely.
Great. So now we're opening the floor for Q&A. If anyone has questions. Any questions?
دائما نايف.
Yes, I like to break the silence. So, can you please talk more about your mom? I think, yeah, like your mom is like one of the strongest women we ever know.
That's very true.
From long time, your mom been an inspiration for a lot of women, a lot of guys too. We always look up to your mom. So please talk more about your mom. So you know her more than any one of us.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I think بلقيس لازم تستضيفونها أحسن. هي
we will. We first get the
do a better job at
get
talking about herself. I was the bait, and then you're gonna get the real prize soon. No, so I mean, I don't know what to tell you other than that she's been our north star, like me and my siblings. She is, like you said, she's the most powerful person I know. And there's not a single problem that I've gone to her with that she couldn't solve. So through her, I learned this kind of outside of the box problem solving technique, where now I see it as we grow as her children. The more we grow, the more we realize that things that we witnessed and behaved in her mannerisms, we kind of like absorbed the sponges growing up. And so I remember that any problem we came across, whether it was at school or with friends or whatever, we just run to her and immediately seek solutions from her. And you could see her go through like this multi-step process of like just really structured, pragmatic problem solving. That's another cool thing that I picked up from her. And I'm actually like, this is the first time I speak about it out loud, but I've realized it very recently. And my sister and I were talking about it the other day, is that when we come across a difficulty or an obstacle or a solution, we kick into mama's problem solving mode of like, okay, there's no use in dwelling into the problem. What are the solutions? What is pragmatically achievable? What can we do? Plan A, plan B, plan C. And we find ourselves doing it now without going to her. And now she says, and now she misses us going to her with these things. And we're like, well, we picked it up from you, so we don't need to go to you anymore. But these are, I think because, again, growing up as a young woman who married very young, went into a really harsh, competitive, male-dominated environment, went from somewhere where she felt like she was the superstar. I mean, she was in her high school and in Kingsford University, she was the top performing student. And then all of a sudden she went to Georgetown and the NIH, where there was a sea of brilliant people, and rebuilding her confidence while giving us the attention that we needed as kids, building memories with us, teaching us that it's okay. Well, not that it's okay, that you should live a life of affection and be compassionate and be expressive. And so my siblings and I we rely on that family unit for those sorts of things, right? We're very expressionist with each other. We're very supportive. And she instilled those things in us. I could go on for days talking to you about lessons that I've learned from her, but I'll tell you that as a young woman in the workforce, a lot of the things, although my journey in everywhere I worked in Saudi has been extremely, I mean, there's highs and lows and ups and downs anywhere, right? But nothing compared to what she's gone through. But I still see myself and catch myself in moments when I'm in a room where I'm the only woman, and that's happened still, okay? And my colleagues from some entities will know this. And that still happens, and I catch myself, and sometimes I pinch myself and think about the times, the stories that my mom used to tell us of being the only woman in the room and how that affected her personality. And I hope that will change also rapidly very soon, as more and more women rise up the career ranks and sit in position in boardrooms and in these, you know, high level meeting rooms and so on. So as a young woman, when I find myself in these positions, I channel her, and I think of her and all the women that have come before her, from as our female ancestors who have paved the way for me to be where I am, to be sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in today, and I don't take it for granted. And I can only hope that, you know, our generation could do the same for the next generation of young Saudi women. And I know that the more hardships that you go through, the more obstacles that stand in your way, the more you sort of go out of your way to pave that path for the generations to come. So I hope we don't become complacent and lenient with that. I hope that we keep carving the path for generations of women to come.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, you mentioned such an inspiring sentence that you mentioned.
Malish, can you repeat the question and hold the mic closer?
واضح?
Yes.
واضح, شكرا.
Yeah. You mentioned that I define myself with my skill set, not my career path. My question is, when someone considering career shifting, what to consider in the decision-making process?
So that's a great question. So my point was, you shouldn't define yourself not by your career path. You don't need to define yourself by the subject that you chose to major in university, what you chose to study, right? So You study something, and by studying that, you develop a certain skill set. That skill set, depending on your interests, your level of competency, what you're passionate about, should be able to take you wherever you want to go, okay? So what I would say is, if you want to make a non-linear shift in your career, or work in a place that has no straightforward link to what you studied, while this is still an issue in our current environment, but like I said, many parts of the world are evolving to respond to this trend, you should think about what value you bring to the table and how you would be of value add to that entity that perhaps by looking at your background thinks that you're not a very straightforward fit, right? So I had to make the case time and time again for why I'm abandoning research in genetics to do something else. But the way to make that argument convincing is that you have to understand, how can I be potentially of indispensable value to this entity, or to this area that is outside of your area of expertise. And sometimes you have the answers to, it can't just be, oh, I want to explore this, right? Because then you're not a value add, right? We all want to explore things that we don't necessarily have expertise in, or cannot necessarily add value to, but it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. So for example, I'll give you an example of what I'm doing now. I work in the Ministry of Investment. Investment attraction, business development, investment policies, investment incentives, all of that has nothing to do with what I studied. And I don't have a background in finance or in business, okay? But what I realized is that I understand very deeply how to negotiate with biotech and pharmaceutical companies, right? Because I studied everything that they're researching, right? I mean, more or less, I understand how their technologies work. I can communicate to them why they should come to the kingdom. I understand our patient population, our genetic structure, the kinds of treatments we need in the kingdom, the kind of innovation happening in the medical and biomedical ecosystem. So I can communicate to them a story about the kingdom. And at the same time, I can speak their language, which is scientific, not the sales language that their offices speak locally. I can speak to their global R&D, to their global manufacturing, and really have a meaningful conversation. That's an edge that I was able to pitch to the Ministry of Investment as to how and why I can add value. So there's something related to what I studied, but that's like 30% of it, right? The rest of it is negotiation, understanding the policies, understanding the ecosystem, communicating that story. And so you can use that example and base other things off of that. But there needs to be a component of that pie where the value that you bring to the table is very uniquely informed by your journey.
Okay. Any other questions? Before you comment, I have a comment. You had an inspiring lady at home, your mother, and I had one as well, Mama.
Allah يخليها لك. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا بالجميع. أنا والدة بلقيس. I'm proud to be. I congratulate her on this milestone. Her career, another achievement, Bلقيس, my queen. And thank you very much, د.سارة, for being tonight with us. And just, I want to tell you something, that some years ago, I also advocated women in Saudi Arabia. As I became a member in McGill University, for lifelong learning after my early retirement from teaching at Al-Qura University. And I was so happy to start a series of cultural lectures about Saudi Arabia. On top of them was a lecture about the new horizons opened for Saudi women. And actually, that was the climax of my lectures. I had a big audience, alhamdulillah, and they were surprised at what I presented to them. And I, of course, convinced them that what they were listening to and where they were introduced to was, of course, proved with real personalities I was presenting to them. And your great mother was one of the leaders that I presented with them. I'm very lucky tonight to have the young version of Dr. Khalwa Al-Kuraya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You are very inspiring. And I wish you and I wish all young women in Saudi Arabia brighter future. Thank you.
Allah يحفظك ويرفع قدرك. Thank you so much.
With that نختم اللقاء الليلة. فشكرا مرة دكتورة سارة. شيء بسيط.
ألف شكر بلقيس. Thank you so much. Thank you.